Hey, we've got a template for terms and conditions that you can use in your shop and customize any way you like. Just click the link in the description below. Check it out. All right. Hey, print hustlers. It's Luke with The Weekly. Today we're going to talk about a super common question, which is how do I write my terms and conditions and what should I have in them? If you're like me, you are not a lawyer, so writing something that feels like a legal document might be kind of intimidating. The truth is that terms and conditions are really there to CYA, if you know what I'm saying. Cover your...
Not in front of the kids.
Oh, sorry.
And it's really there just in case something goes wrong or a customer's like really unhappy. Let me just say that if you're here because of a problem you had in the past, put that behind you. You can always update your terms and conditions to include new situations and predicaments. So let's check this out. The first question is probably, why do you need terms and conditions? And you're probably wondering, well, is this worth it? And it is. You can prevent the abuse of services with your terms and conditions. Now, this is really helpful because sometimes unscrupulous customers might want to behave badly or rip you off or just be jerks, and you can get rid of them this way. You can also just kind of lay out the ground rules for how things work. The other thing is you can set expectations. Like I said, you can lay out the ground rules from print locations to delivery dates. The terms and conditions are going to define exactly what your customers should experience and what they should expect. And it kind of holds you accountable too. The other thing is that terms and conditions really do limit your liability. This doesn't happen everywhere, of course, and it depends on what you mean exactly by that. But what I mean is that you can prevent issues with spoilage, returns, refunds, and non-payment pretty quickly just through defining that in your terms and conditions. The other thing is that terms and conditions actually establish ownership of your artwork. So if you want to own the artwork you create for customers, you can define that in your terms and conditions. If you want to sell it to them, you can do that there too. We'll talk a little bit more about this later. But in other words, terms and conditions there are there to really prevent abuse, limit the liability you have, set customer expectations, and establish ownership of property, artwork that's exchanged and created. Let's talk through the 10 things you probably want in your terms and conditions. The first thing are just like ground rules, general service items. So think about what happens in the process of you serving a customer. There's probably like sales intake, defining the job specifications, quoting, quote approval, art approvals, art revisions, press proofs and approvals, shipping, spoilage and misprint policy, rejections, refunds, et cetera, et cetera. You know what I'm saying, right? There's a whole bunch of stuff that has to be conveyed to the customer. So the first section should really be very similar to your internal policies and procedures, but in language that a customer understands. Don't use a lot of technical jargon or screen printing industry language. Just stick to what the customer should know about what they need to be involved with. So this works because you can refer back to them when you have a challenging customer, and it's a roadmap for resolving the issue. As a rule, it's a kind of better to remember to smooth things over with your customers versus like referring to your terms and conditions and being like, hey, we're sticking to our guns. But think about the lifetime value of that customer and whether it's worth it or not. Another thing that we've seen shops do a lot of is have an acceptance clause. And your terms and conditions are no good if they're not like easily accessible. So that's why we recommend putting it in your terms and conditions in Printavo. This can be done through a signature when they accept a quote, or it can be done through something simpler like continued use. This typically means including the phrase, the use of our services constitutes acceptance of the terms and conditions. If customers don't like the terms, then they don't use your service. The third thing is that you want to have a privacy policy. So if you're collecting information about your customers, you have to protect it. And you really need to study your local laws about this because some places are more strict about this than others. Be careful. But usually simple phrasing is something like, our company shall implement and maintain reasonable procedures for protecting personal information in accordance with local law and our privacy policy. But just make sure that you're actually doing that. The fourth one is the limitation of liability. So besides the first section that outlines the specifics of what you do, you can have a robust limitation of liability. This means no bootlegging. The goal here is to demonstrate that like your business can't be held liable for problems arising from the use of your services. So here's what you can include. It can be like problems relating to a missed event because of a missed deadline or shipping errors, misprints, spoilage, late orders, or just some other breach of contract, like basically a customer asking you to print copyrighted art. So if you're really concerned about liability and you don't have robust insurance to protect your business, now's probably a good time to think about getting some insurance. Just saying. The fifth one are property rights. So this is often used to protect companies against theft, but some screen printing businesses use this to protect their intellectual property, in other words, artwork that they've created. If you have an art department and spend a lot of time on customer art, it's worth considering whether your business actually owns that art. So this is just worth defining very clearly in your terms and conditions. The reason you'd want to do this is that we've heard from shops that some customers essentially steal the artwork they've created and then shop it around to other shops. So just make sure that you have some way of securing your artwork or getting paid for it. So another thing is you could just include a fee for the artwork and say, hey, you can buy the art for $50 or whatever price you want to charge. Ultimately, really though, it's like up to you to define exactly who owns the art that your shop creates for customers. And this is a sticking point for some customers, so just make sure you have terms and conditions for it. Another element, the sixth element, are payment terms. So we've harped on this a lot, but you really want to get 100% down if you can, whenever that's feasible. Not every customer is going to want that or accept that, but you should try. If you don't include specific payment amounts in this section, customers can come with you with a lot of questions. So you might want to include things like how exactly to pay, what types of payment are accepted, deadlines for payment, your non-payment policies, which is like, do you just stop if they don't pay? Do you send a couple notices? Like, how does that work? Your refunds and returns policy, and then, common fees or charges that people might see on invoices. If you really define those clearly in your terms and conditions, it can eliminate a lot of questions, or you can send people there when they have this question. So really, I think about refunds and exchanges, just to get specific here, I don't think you should really offer them. You really can't offer them if you do a lot of screen printing because of the low margin and custom-made products aren't really resellable. But if you're willing to reprint orders or, maybe make something right, it's worth kind of explaining that here or having a clause that's like, hey, if something's wrong, please contact us first. That's, of course, always a good idea. Seventh thing is the termination clause. So this isn't something that a lot of shops encounter because they don't really deal with this, but it's something worth including anyway. It's really just there if you need to fire a client. It's something simple, usually like, you're free to stop using our services at any time, but we may terminate service with notice or without notice if you violate our terms, abuse our services, cause us legal liability, or otherwise harm or hamper our continued operations. Kind of just being like, hey, look, don't mess with us. The eighth thing that's important to include are revisions and changes. So over time, you're probably going to want to change these terms and conditions. You're probably going to learn some things that are specific to your business that you need to include in the terms and conditions. So include a brief clause in the terms and conditions that says, we may revise our terms and conditions from time to time to better meet legal requirements or address changes in our services. And, maybe include a thing that says you'll be notified of email any changes to those terms. That can kind of help you avoid any sort of legal challenge if your customers have not been notified that you've made changes to the terms and conditions. So just be aware of that. The ninth thing to include is contact info. I know this seems sort of silly to include, but really putting your email address, a phone number, some easy way to get in touch if people have questions or concerns is actually a really good way to use your terms and conditions because that's somewhere they might look. And finally, the 10th thing, simplified terms and conditions. Now, I think the terms and conditions can be kind of confusing and long and people don't want to read the whole thing. So my advice is you can lead with a super simple, plain English kind of terms and conditions that is just there so people know what they're agreeing to and can get the ball rolling and feel like they trust you. I included this in our template terms and conditions here that you can download. I think the big tips here are really make sure that things are covering your butt. You really want to make sure that these are on your invoices in Printavo or in some other clear location on your website, like maybe at your domain/terms or something like that. And also, we'd love to know what worked for your shop or what didn't work for your shop. So if you've learned something about your terms and conditions that could help other shops, hey, drop a comment, let us know. Maybe we can share some knowledge. And also, Chris will drop a link in the description so you can download our terms and conditions template and try it for yourself.
Are you signed up for the weekly? It's a brand new email newsletter that we put together to send you every single week a bunch of tips to be able to help improve your business. As a shop owner, there's so much that you have to be able to focus on, and we're consolidating it to practical things that you could be able to take back into your business every single week. We're really excited about it. It's going to be super helpful. Sign up down in the description below.